You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show author Chris Pavone from Brooklyn. How you doing, Chris?
Hi, how are you?
Great. So, Chris, you wrote a book, an international bestseller called The Expats, which is short for The Expatriates. Without giving it away, can you just give us a little introduction to the book?
The Expats is an espionage thriller that focuses on an American woman who moves abroad to follow her husband's career to Luxembourg and discovers in her new expat life that none of the people who surround her are exactly who they're pretending to be. And somewhere along the line, she has to admit that she herself isn't exactly who she's pretending to be either.
Okay, sounds very intriguing. Is it based anything on your life?
Well, Kate Moore is my protagonist, is someone who left behind her career and with it a large part of her identity to follow her spouse abroad, to become a stay-at-home parent in support of her husband's career, to lie on the floor playing with their small children, to spend her days grocery shopping and cooking and cleaning and trying to make new friends and a new life in a new country. And in my household, that person was me. So a lot of the texture of this book is based on my life. And when I started writing a book about my life as an expat stay-at-home parent. And I was sitting in cafes in Luxembourg, that's where we'd lived, typing away about my trials, doing laundry and shopping every day and feeding these children and tending to them. And I realized about 2 months after working on this book that unfortunately writing a book about boring stuff means writing a boring book. Mm-hmm. And I definitely didn't want to write a boring book, and so I introduced some other elements to make it less boring, and in the end, I overhauled the entire thing, and I changed the book around from being a very, very realistic, honest book about expat life to being an espionage thriller, which I have to admit is not all that based on real life. The plot isn't all that based on real life.
Well, I am wondering about that because most of our listeners are expatriates, and perhaps they're all very involved in espionage as well.
Yeah.
A lot of the letters that I get, the people log into goldsteinongelt.com and their listener letters say things like, "Dear Doug, I have an investment in Switzerland and Luxembourg, and really I'm a spy. Can you advise me?" Mm-hmm. No, I'm kidding. That's never happened, but that would be cool. So when you were living abroad, what was it like?
Well, the most important difference to me was not that I was living abroad, but that I was living in a very small city, and I'm from a very big one. I've lived in New York City my whole life except for college, and right now I'm talking to you from the dead center of Greenwich Village, surrounded by big apartment buildings and millions of people, and the ability to get anything I want, anytime I want, for a relatively little amount of money. And Luxembourg, even though a lot of people have heard of it, or maybe they haven't heard of it, I'd heard of it, and it is the capital of a country, and it is one of the EU capitals. It's not really a city. It's a small town that happens to be a capital. It has no public transportation to speak of. I think 100,000 people live there. It's a very, very small place, and I found that challenging. I found it very, very disorienting to walk around a city or walk around Luxembourg for a day or two and realize that I'd seen the whole thing. And it was, I never really did get used to that. We lived in Luxembourg for a year and a half, and the smallness of it, not just the physical smallness, but the social smallness, the finite number of expats in my world, and the extent to which we ran into each other everywhere. It was at once enjoyable and very much amenable to making new friends, and at the other hand, it was not that exciting after a while, and it seemed particularly global in a way to see the same people every day, even though they were all people from different countries.
Were there a lot of Americans in the city with you?
There were no, there were some Americans, but there were a lot of English-speaking people from Europe. It was very Northern Europe. There were a lot of people from the Netherlands and England and Sweden, and there were Americans too, but I saw less of Americans than I did see of other Europeans.
Okay. We're talking to Chris Pavone, who's the author of the international bestseller called The Expats. He actually lived for a few years in Luxembourg, which is where he wrote the book, and he got the ideas from the book, and I guess then developed it into a real thriller. It's doing fabulously. In fact, it has rights sold in 15 countries, and a movie is going to be coming out soon, right?
Oh, I don't know if the movie's coming out soon. My understanding about the film business is it's impossible to predict until you're actually sitting in a theater watching the movie when or if it will get made. But I sold the rights a couple of years ago, and the studio has produced a screenplay, which I read and was great, and now they're revising the screenplay. But I think there are so many dominoes that need to fall in place before people actually start rolling cameras. And I am blissfully ignorant of the business and keeping my nose out of it. Someday, hopefully, somebody will invite me to the premiere, and I'll put on a tuxedo and go. But until that moment, I don't think I'm going to be fully aware of what's going on.
All right, that sounds like a good plan. But you are involved in the book itself. Let's talk a little bit about the book business. When you came up with the idea and you started writing, you had a lot of experience already in publishing. What steps did you take to make sure, or to make you believe that you would actually have a successful book?
Well, when I began writing, I didn't really know what type of book I was writing, and that's not the way to go about it. And I knew that was not the way to go about it, but that got me thinking on a daily basis about what this story could be. And then once I realized that I could turn this into an espionage novel and that it would have some chance of commercial success in the world, I stopped writing entirely the text of the book, and I focused on creating two documents. One was an outline of the book, and the other was a one-page pitch of the book. One page, not a summary really, but the type of thing that you would read on the flaps of a hardcover book or on the back of a paperback, the thing that entices you to read the book. That pitch is the thing that, in the end, I was focused every day on hewing closely to, because I knew that I'd been able to craft a one-page pitch of the story that was credible, that was good, that was compelling, that would make people want to read the book. And then I had to do the careful work of making sure that I wrote the book that I promised myself I would write. And so I spent really more than a month writing just these two pages, the pitch and the outline. And I think in a lot of ways, it's always important to focus whenever you're writing a book on making sure that you're delivering the thing that you set out to write. And people get distracted, especially in fiction, by when they start writing, going down other paths and creating other elements to the book that aren't necessarily the things that they intended. And sometimes they're great ideas, but sometimes they're really just not. Sometimes what they're doing is shooting themselves in the foot. And instead of writing the perfect book about personal finance, they end up waxing didactic on child rearing. And the thing that people are looking for in a book about personal finance is information about personal finance. And I sort of felt the same as I was writing a thriller, that I at times veered off into writing other types of material, and I kept stopping myself and reminding myself to go back to my pitch and my outline and focus on the best story that I could tell in the goal that I was trying to accomplish.
It's funny, the word you use, focus, comes up over and over again on the Goldstein on Gelt show, and it's also, of course, ironic that you bring up the point about personal finance. You know, I just came out with a book, not also about expats, but mine is not a thriller unless you think that taxation is. It's called The Expatriates Guide to Handling Money and Taxes. It's designed for people who live outside the United States to deal with all of the new tax regulations, which are unbelievably complicated. I'll just note for anyone who wants to learn about that, just go to expatguidetommoney.com. But while we're talking about websites, what's the website for your book?
It's my name, www.chrispavone.com.
That's Pavone.com. Okay, so you had this document that you were focused on and working on every day. Is that the document you used actually to bring the book to a publisher, or did you have to actually, in fact, finish the whole thing?
I finished the whole thing before I brought it to a publisher. I finished the whole thing before I brought it to a literary agent, which is the first stop along the way. But before I moved to Luxembourg to follow my wife's career, I spent nearly 2 decades in the book publishing business. I was a nonfiction editor primarily, and I jumped around to a few houses. And I am at this point 44 years old, and having worked in the book publishing business since I was 21, I know a lot about the business and I know a lot of people. And so there were certain aspects of my path to publication that were smoother for me than they would be for a lot of other first-time novelists, beginning with the fact that I knew who I was going to send it to as an agent. And it wasn't a question of me sending a blind query letter, which is what people need to do, but calling up somebody who I'd met 20 years before and had known for 2 decades and saying, "Hi, I've written a manuscript. Would you like to take a look?" And so that was the first step after I finished revising on my own.
I guess that would be good advice to an aspiring author to, in fact, work in the industry for a couple of decades and then have all the connections.
It's not necessarily the shortest path to publication, but
well, for some people it's shorter than what they've been trying, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think it's the quality of the book and the excitement of the story which has led your book to become such a success. Chris, we're actually just about out of time. We've been talking to Chris Pavone, who wrote the international bestseller, The Expats. We can learn more about it at chrispavone.com. And the book is sold both physically and digitally?
Yes. Wherever there are digital books to be sold, you can buy a digital book of The Expats. And in physical form, it's available in hardcover and paperback from publishers in many, many languages and many formats. It's pretty widely available.
And in fact, I understand it's going to be coming out in Hebrew sometime towards the end of 2013.
Yes, that's right.
So all of our Israel National Radio listeners can wait for that if they want to read it in their native tongue. Chris Pavone, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt show.